Okay, so good morning, everyone. This is a very complicated part of our study so far in the class, because I think it's the kind of like nexus of everything that we've been studying so far, and it's also the challenge in the book itself. When you as very well learned students by now, and you might scoff at just how much you know. You will have, at least as long as I've been your teacher, know that you have acquired a significant amount of learning, and still there lingers in the recesses of our thoughts about our sacred text that somehow they're a book of faith, that like the Torah is supposed to somehow be a manual, a guidebook to faith. And if you think about it, and we try quite often to do so, right? So we have this history of the universe, and we have a history of a people, and we have a journey story, and all these things that are part of the things that make up the Torah, that you would say this is sort of like the Jewish definition of faith. And then you were like, wait a minute, did creation really happen the way it happened? And wait a minute, was there really a guy named Abraham? Was there really even a people named the Bnei Israel that were enslaved in Egypt? And, talking snakes or talking donkeys and snakes that turned from staves. All this stuff, is this real? Right? And then you ask the bigger questions. Was there really anything that happened on that mountain that day, which we're about to celebrate in just a few days this weekend? And so if faith is somehow connected to fact, if you will, that is, if faith is really like the confirmation of fact, that you'll believe when you see it, so to speak, then the Torah can be a very disappointing document. And we as learners we're often like grappling with it. I think it's kind of like at the core of what Jewish identity is not really an affirmation or a proclamation of faith, loyalty to a God that we believe we are in partnership with, that revealed itself to us, and that we have a responsibility to fulfill these mitzvot, these obligations based on what was commanded to us. It's not that. And I think even though it feels like that's the superficial explanation of Judaism, right? If you were to talk to somebody and they asked you, what is Judaism? And you were trying to give them the like one sentence elevator pitch of what Judaism is, right? You might get a little bit stuck when you talk about the Torah as a book of faith. I mean, and if you do, right, because you're just trying to say it to get people to believe it, you're doing it because there's some kind of like presumption that's out there in the world that a sacred text is the sort of foundation of faith. But then if you have more than just an elevator ride to really start describing Judaism, which is what it needs, then you would come up with all kinds of really complex definitions of what it is that we're talking about. Now, the reason that I wanted to frame what we're learning today in our class with relationship to the questions that the Torah poses itself, I want to validate that despite the challenge that I just laid before us, that this may not be a book of faith as one might classically understand it to be, or that, if we were to try and explain what the faith of Judaism is, we might not look to the Torah as our primary document, that nonetheless, the questions that are posed are really, they're prisms through which we can refract this concept of faith. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of these questions and see what kind of faith is the faith of the Jewish people. What does it mean to believe in the Jewish God? Or what does it mean to have belief in Judaism? And I think if we can get through, and by the way, these are just a sampling of the questions that relate to faith in the book itself. It's a great way for us to begin to understand really what I think faith is trying to provide for us. All right, any comments, responses to that so far, or is that, yes, Suzanne?
My understanding is that we're not a people of faith. We're a people of struggle. that I'm not, the Christians believe and we struggle. And so as you were talking about faith, I just don't see that as the basis of Judaism.
Yeah, right. That's also another layer of challenge. Like, what is the definition of faith? Is faith, because if we look at faith, we happen to be heavily influenced. It's almost like genetic about how our it is a cultural meme, not in the meme that you hear the kids talking about meme, but a real meme. The initial definition, which is it's a concept that is applicable in a variety of contexts that doesn't even that's not attached into any one particular concept. Right. And if you look at faith, the meme of faith in American culture is the very Christian centered notion of faith. And so that's why, Suzanne rightfully balks or, was bristling at the fact that, like, talking about faith in Judaism is not what we do. Right? Like, Jews, faith, right? We don't have time for faith. We're too busy worrying. That's what we do. So that's one of the challenges that we have. On the other hand, there is a lot of faith in Judaism, a profound amount of faith. I mean, it is really the sort of foundational concept that Judaism brought to the world, a concept that there is a power, a force greater than our tangible, physical, material beings, nothing that we could create in a stone or a wood or some kind of structure, but that exists, right? That existence demands a certain amount of faith. And how we grapple with that is what makes us Yisrael, right? The struggling people. Any other comments? Very nice point. All right, so let's get into our text. Okay, very good. Let's see how we do it over here. All right. Boop. How's that look for everybody? Is that good? All right, so far so good. All right, so Voltaire, if you don't know who Voltaire is, and I actually don't know his first name. I'm not sure I ever learned that when I'm thinking about it, or it's been so long. It's Chaim, right? He was not a Jewish guy at all, but he was one of the foundational thinkers in the period of history known as the Enlightenment, sort of like the turn of the 17th century. And it's in his writings that you get also, look, René Descartes was a contemporary, right? And René Descartes says, I think, therefore I am, right? And this whole concept of reasonability, rationality is something that is brought to the world as a basis, which ultimately brings us to the 21st century. We are still influenced powerfully by the concept of reason. So here he is in his initial writings, and he says, faith consists in believing when it is beyond the power to believe. Now, this is like the scientist saying what he was saying. And if you remember last week, we were talking about scientists, using the absence of questions or sort of the absence of proof as a question of whether or not God really does exist. And scientists are comfortable, way more comfortable than we are, with the uncertainties that exist, where there's an absence of questions, if you will, or as we read, like the absence of evidence doesn't mean the evidence of absence, as Carl Sagan said. This is the same kind of like syllogism, if you will, right? Faith is in believing that which the power of reason cannot, that does not have an answer for. Right? And you believe in that. So what are some things? Just think about that. What is it that is something that you believe in that is beyond the power of reason to believe? When you see that, what comes up to mind? You could say love. Let's do that, right? And then you're like, well, define love. No, right? Like you feel love, right? But like love is demonstrable. Love is demonstrable when someone performs acts of kindness or care or shares responsibility with you. There are lots of things that are tangible. They are rational. They are evidentiary. They are ways that you show that love exists. Okay? But despite all of that, the sort of like, in Hebrew, it's a sense of connection. Teshukah is the word in Hebrew, that you are like connected to somebody, even if they're not proving rationally to you that love exists. Okay. there's a negative side to that as well, right? Which is people who are victims of abuse will often like maintain their relationships with the people who are abusive because they feel that connection, right? So there's an irrationality to it that is hard to overcome. So faith sort of lives in that area. That's the first one. The second thing is I'm still far from being what I want to be, but with God's help, I shall succeed. Vincent van Gogh. So what did Vincent van Gogh say here? That faith, it's not the word faith is, but think about faith in this concept. It's the potential to realize that which is not yet been realized. So here he talks about success, right? Whatever success is his definition. But ultimately, you can understand that concept. You have a faith that what you are doing is going to yield the intended result. You don't know if it's going to work. You might have all the rationality, all the numbers in place to make it happen, but you won't be certain until you actually get there. And what it is this sense of belief, faith in a power greater than yourself, here defined as God, that comes to define what faith is all about. Believe it or not, Jews can get on board with this, even though we're so darn skeptical and stubborn about it. Okay, so who would like to read today? Roberta asked you. Oh, Lauren, yes, go ahead.
If you didn't have faith, you would have fear. So then you wouldn't do anything. Don't you have to have faith just to like go out of your house and faith to do anything? Otherwise, you especially in today's world,
Yeah.
you would be terrified to do anything. So if you didn't have faith, you would be just fearful.
I think that while they may exist on a continuum, faith and fear, there's also this terrible and most destructive experience, and that is of apathy, right? The lack of care at all, right? So faith is a care in potential. Fear is a care in protection, or it's also sort of the fear of the unknown, and or the lack of faith in the unknown, and somewhere along is apathy, right? I don't care whether the future is good or bad. It's like I don't want it. I'm not going to do anything about it. So Roberta asks, you feel like reading? You're top of the screen. So this, by the way, comes from the book of Genesis, and we're in the moment when Abraham hears from God that he's about to give birth to a child. And this is Abraham's response. Okay, go ahead.
Would you tell God you don't believe? Can a child be born to a man 100 years old? Or can Sarah bear a child at 90? Now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? The irony of nakedness in the opening chapters of Genesis is that there is no reference point to induce any embarrassment by one's vulnerability. Nakedness prompts the question, is vulnerability innate or learned? Here, two moments reveal a sense of nakedness in the form of barrenness that can only be satisfied with divine response. The vulnerability of barrenness has not been explored between God and humanity at this point. We simply know Sarah is barren and feels shame when her perception of Hagar's pregnancies lowers her in the esteem of her maidservant.
Okay, great. So that's the sort of setting the stage. We're going to talk about vulnerability as a component of faith, right? So think about what Lauren was saying. When people feel fear or they have anxiety, they feel vulnerable, whether it's real or perceived, right? There's a perception element to this. Vulnerability is the sense of nakedness, right? You are not well equipped with what you think it takes in order for you to confront the present and the future that is ahead of you. Okay, so go ahead.
But do Abraham and Sarah feel ashamed here? Abraham asked God, can a child be born to a man 100 years old, or can Sarah bear a child at 90? Followed by Sarah's question here. Now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? We first read these as expressions of corporal concern. Even later, when Sarah poses it in disbelief, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would suckle children? The point of reference for this vulnerability is not God. Ironically, it's towards themselves.
Okay, so just pay attention, right? So when we're talking about faith is, somehow that like God is going to do something for us. When we're talking about what does it mean to believe? Okay, are they saying that they're believing in God? Can God really deliver a baby? Who knows, right? Maybe God can. But the issue is like, look at our old withered bodies. Like, could we possibly be able to conceive? I'm 100 years old. I didn't know that those parts of my body worked anymore. And Sarah, like, who knew that those parts of her body worked anymore? So the self-referential point of this is another aspect of faith, right? In your vulnerability, are you like this is what people who are anxious, they are afraid of they say, I can't do it because everything out there is so chaotic and out of control. And so it's not like I need to gain some control. The other side of it here is I'm out of control. So how can I possibly do this thing that seems so certain? Okay. So that's what we're sort of grappling with here. You want to keep reading or you want to pass it on?
No, I can read.
All right, keep going.
And still, tone can dramatically change the impact of these questions. Is the tone like that of Abraham, who will confront God before the destruction of Sodom? Is this the tone of laughter, expressed in response to an idea that seems delightfully beyond human comprehension? Is the tone one of doubt that their custody is a hint of their disbelief?
Their curiosity. Yeah.
Oh, their curiosity.
Yeah, that's
These,
right.
okay. These questions invite all three possibilities and offer meaningful understandings of the text that follows and the pending arrival of Isaac. If we read the questions as confrontation, Abraham and Sarah embody a cautious faith, one that invites conversation with God, even argument with God, but does not see how the rules of biology and nature can be overcome by God's omnipotence. If we read the questions as those with levity, the disbelief is one closer to self-doubt than God-doubt. Their laughter is both a veil for their own uncertainties in their abilities as it is incomprehensible. If we read the questions with a doubtful curiosity, we are still met with a layer of meaning not easily gleaned from the surface of the text, the expression of limitation. The awareness, that physical ability becomes limited as one ages is also a novel subject for the Torah. Here it appears that the experience of embarrassment is also a dissolution of innocence. Lack of belief isn't an affront to divinity. On the contrary, divine knowledge is the recognition of that which once was a limitation has now become a possibility. Without authentic doubt, limitations arrest a relationship. Through doubt, by contrast, even the possibility of bearing a child in old age is powerful enough to overcome shame and confirm one's faith.
Thank you very much. So I suppose it's helpful for us to know that there was a woman, I think in India or something like that. She gave birth to a child at 82 years old, right? Have you heard that story before? You're like, what is that? She was probably really 26 and somebody messed up in the counting or something like that, right? Okay, so, right, we're like totally not believing that this is possible. And yet there's like, if there are biological standards, or people are supposed to, only sort of fit into these categories, and it's presumed that, when people are at their old age, they shouldn't be able to do this, right? Part of it is a rational belief, right? That's totally rational, right? Most people have this, but apparently we have these outliers that sort of like break the mold. So it would be very safe for you to assume that I'm like most people, right? Now that's fine. to believe that, but where does that belief limit your sense of possibility? And I think that that's what this question is introducing. Why are we getting a story about Abraham and Sarah having a child in old age? You could have said that it's all about the concept of legacy, and that Abraham and Sarah, who are these the founders of the religion, they need to have a child from their own in order for Judaism to maintain its purity. Well, we know what that kind of thinking has done to human history. Besides the fact that like there is a perfectly healthy and legitimate child through Sarah's concubine Hagar, and who God says, I'm going to make them a great people too, right? And if you read the Quran, they've got it the other way, right? That the chosen elected child is Ishmael, and that Isaac is also another child, right? And the concept that somehow if we're just going to limit ourselves to whether or not this kid was actually born or not, we overlook the very fundamental question that I think that is being presented here. What does it mean to have possibility in your life? What does it mean to live a life with faith? And Abraham, right? Where's the Abraham of Sodom and Gomorrah? Who he, a little bit later, he'd be like, how can you, the judge of all righteousness and justice of the earth, cause, harm to these innocent people, right? Where's his, where's his impulse for justice? Where's the justice in this moment? Where's that voice? It could be there, right? All right, you prove it to us, God, that you could do this thing. But it could also be all of these other pieces. So it depends on how you read it. Whether it's like, hey, our bodies don't work this way. God, if you could make us have a child, wow, you really are God. Or you have this other one which says, I'm not sure, God, that you really are capable of doing this, but I'm willing to entertain the possibility. What a great definition of faith for us all. When you think about your own concepts of faith, it seems severely limited if the faith was only to say, look, God is the thing that defies nature. And as long as you believe in God, nature will be overcome. That's a very difficult thing for us to swallow. Most of us are like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen, right? Or, where was God in all the places that God said that, God said, I'm going to be, protecting you. And all the times that in our history, the people were left vulnerable and unprotected. All of these things are kind of like really complicated when you narrow your definition of faith, but they get expanded all of a sudden when you say, hey, I'm not sure, but it's possible. What a wonderful way to look at the rest of the world. It's not always easy because sometimes you want to have certainty. That should never happen, right? It should never happen that a deranged 18-year-old kid kills his grandma and then goes in and kills, 21 people. What is that, right? That exists too. That's the problem. So to live in a world in which there is such a thing as possibility means that it is as much a proactive posture as it is a reactive posture. Any comments, Judy? Jeannie.
I just think faith is so closely intertwined with hope. And if we don't have hope and faith in our lives, how do we get through a lot of the things that we get through? Look at all these people in Texas now. How are they gonna move on without faith?
Yeah. I'm reading a book right now called The Sweet Spot, which is all about suffering. Where you're like, God, Rabbi, why are you reading a book about suffering? It's all about the reality. Here's the reality, Judy, right? We all suffer, right? So it's a matter of where do we place our suffering? Some people willingly put themselves in suffering. We all do that, by the way. Delayed gratification, we called it, right? But the concept of what you said is that there's, we all have to react some way with some uncertainty, right? Or else we will never leave the house, as Lauren reminded us, right? If we don't have some kind of faith that what's going to happen is going to be safe enough, we wouldn't do anything in this world. So this is one of those, it's a question that's opening that up for us, right? At the very foundation of what it means in the Torah to hear our founding ancestors also grappling with this in a very real way is important. Jeannie.
I was just thinking about the fact that in a lot of cases, one person's faith pretty much negates someone else's possibilities. And there are a lot of people whose faith limit others' ability to have those possibilities. So I don't know how, I mean, I don't know if we're just talking about faith and possibilities within ourselves, but I'm looking at it more globally. I mean, I believe, you know, I mean, even let's talk in terms of like a freedom of choice. You know, my faith, my belief is that it should be, you know, there should be no such thing as ending a pregnancy. But if by enacting my faith, I've negated the possibility for other people's choices and abilities to have, you know, possibilities in their lives.
You know what? That is such a great point, and it's also why we live in a country in which these things require vigorous debate, right? Because the hopefully the task when there are conflicting faith propositions, if you will, is to figure out how do we resolve them. We may agree to disagree, but we can be respectful in our mutual disagreement. But it's when we try to sort of overlay one on top of the other, forcing one issue over another, that's when we get into trouble. And the truth is, it's always going to be like that. So the only thing, and that's part of the sort of like power of humanity. What I loved about your comment at this particular moment, going back to Abraham and Sarah, is think about this. So on the one hand, Abraham could have been totally selfish. And it could sound negative, right? He could sound like, why is he talking about his wife not being able to give birth at age 90? But on the other hand, he's saying, look, if the rules don't apply to me, he could have done a hard stop there. How can I do this? But he's like, I can't do it and she can't do it. There's something wonderfully like common and synthesized between that. That's an additional comment that I read out of your comment that says, this is why it's a part of our Torah, is that Abraham and Sarah, you know, at least through Abraham's voice, and then we get some confirmation with Sarah, she's also mildly in disbelief, that they also kind of like have a common faith. They have a common faith. It's a common disbelief, but it's a common faith. Very nice. Any other comments? Yeah. Uh-oh. And who did we lose? My screen just went crazy. Yeah. Roberta S., go ahead.
I just want to say God bless Suzanne, because she has the faith and she is amazing. And I believe, and she believes, and she is.
Yeah.
And she's great. Love her.
We're going to get to that dimension of faith along the way. Oh, man, I feel love you guys. And we're on Zoom, you know. I don't, by the way, I've taught several other classes on Zoom. This is a lot easier because I think you guys know each other so well, but also that, like, you know, we've really accustomed well to Zoom. I like us in person. I'm not advocating for us to continue to do this. But it's good for today. All right, here we go. Let's go on to the next question. Jeannie, you're next up in my screen if you'd like to read.
What if the woman does not consent to follow me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the land from which you came? What if the woman does not follow me?
So stop right there. This is right after Sarah dies, and Abraham needs to get his son Isaac married off. And he takes his servant Eliezer and he says, go back to the land that I came from and go get his cousin. Okay, well, he doesn't say specifically his cousin, but he says, go back to my family, right? And go find somebody good looking there. And if she's wealthy, that would be fine too, okay? That's not explicit Torah, but you get the implication. All right, go ahead.
When defining perfection without fail, we quickly go to the absence of flaws or the fulfillment of a duty. An object or an action that is pristine may be perfect in construction, but ironically, perfection is a relative concept. The subjectivity of perfection is all the more evident in faith, where faith is an inner experience measured by the way it is expressed. Perfect faith, should it exist, is when the inner beliefs are consistent with the external practices.
So just a quick pause. Do you guys get to, I feel like that's an important statement. We have a concepts of perfection in all places. We're looking for perfection in matter. We're looking for perfected theories of our universe. And I think we also have a concept of perfect faith. And if there's anything that is possible, it's the approximation of our faith when our inner beliefs are consistent with our external practices. Now that actually does happen. But if you talk to even people, think about your great religious leaders who may have doubts in their faith, right? Even they, in their practice, may practice one way, but they don't believe it. And so it looks like they have perfect faith, but they don't. Please continue.
The story of Abraham helps us understand this best. Classical Jewish commentaries focus on Abraham's journey as 10 trials he must endure to validate his devotion to God of all. From heeding the call to travel to the land of Canaan to bringing his son to the altar, there are 10 distinct moments when Abraham's faith is tested. We will even read that Abraham is blessed in everything. And yet Abraham's story doesn't conclude when the knife is lowered and he and his son return home from the mountain following the 10th test. We might presume that this success in achieving perfect faith enables him to enjoy the rest of his days without any tests. Abraham's blissful retirement is a reward for the tremendous and somewhat audacious struggle to bring God into the world. God's promise to perpetuate Abraham's lineage, though through Isaac isn't complete. Abraham's life isn't perfect yet.
Right. So you would have said that, if this was a book about outlining perfect faith and Abraham is our model, then bring your son up to a mountain and being willing to sacrifice him and allowing an angel to stay your hand before that happens could be an example of perfect faith, right? And you would say oh my God, what religion is this that would put someone to the test like that? Right? And even, so here's the point, even if we thought that was the case, it's not over yet, because he has to get his kid married off, because you can't have a legacy without a family to continue that on. Lauren?
Judy was knocked off and she's trying to get back on.
Oh,
Is she in the waiting room?
I don't know. Let's go see. I don't think so. Let me just stop this for a moment, please. And I don't see her. So tell her now. Oh, there you are. She's here. Hi, Judy. Are you okay?
My internet keeps crashing, so
Yeah.
going in and out.
Like Fran, it's not a statement on your personal mental health. But Fran, it says her internet connection is unstable, right? No, you're fine. You're fine. Just maybe take some more walks in the world. All right, so momentary digression, right? So perfect faith, there is no definition of perfect faith in Judaism. And if we're going to walk away saying that, look, our model is going to be Moses, our model is going to be standing at the mountain on Mount Sinai, we're going to see again and again and again that that's not it. So where's my friend Suzanne? Suzanne, this is why Jews are the way that we are, because it's never perfect. It's never perfect. So what does it mean to have a God in which it's never perfect? Welcome to the Torah. And if you were to sell that to a friend, if you were like, what's Judaism all about? You'd be like, oh, well, it's this never-ending struggle with God to make God perfect in a world that's highly imperfect. They'd be like, oh, that sounds horrible. Why would you do that? I hope you see the benefits other than me and my critique. Jeannie, you ready to read on?
So Abraham asks his servant, Eliezer, to return to Haran so that he may find a suitable wife for Isaac. He is explicit in telling him that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but will go to the land of my birth and get a wife for my son Isaac. Eliezer challenges Abraham's condition by asking, what if the woman does not consent to follow me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the land from which you come? The question is quite logical. Eliezer can certainly find a wife for him, but the chances that she would leave her parents' home to journey to a distant land for a husband she has never met seems quite far-fetched. He will reiterate the question of Rebecca's father and brother. What if the woman does not follow me? Affirming his concern for Abraham's narrow expectations. Abraham's condition that she must return reveals a dimension of faith that we haven't grappled with yet. While Abraham's insistence implies his faith is immutable, it is the success of Eliezer's mission that reveals what perfect faith looks like. Abraham says, and if the woman does not consent to follow you, you shall then be clear of this oath to me, but do not take my son back there. Abraham's sense of purpose is truly tied to God's promise. There is no compromise from Abraham here, even though Isaac could have easily lived in Haran and brought the grandchildren to visit up for the holidays. Perfect faith may not be the unflinching belief that our expectations will become reality. Abraham's perfect faith is that even if the servant cannot fulfill his command, there will be another way to fulfill God's promise.
Okay. All right. So I hope you, so what I think you see is like, again, what is it? What's the definition of Abraham's faith? Is Abraham's faith defined by his ability to follow command? Yes, up until the point that he's all the way up on the top of the mountain, ready to plunge a knife into his son. Well, that test is done. So now what, right? So God says, you got to get your kid a son. And this is not God. God doesn't command it to Abraham. Abraham's like, God says, Abraham, you're going to be, the father of many generations, right? And your descendants are going to be numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand in the sea, sand on the desert, whatever, right? And the concept that Abraham is actually taking that proposition seriously is him saying, go get a wife for my son from the place that I came, because you're not going to do it from these women that are here. That's an interesting question of faith in and of itself for another conversation. But then Eliezer says, and I think it's great, he says, it's not a lack of faith. He says, what happens if I get there and your faith is not realized? And Abraham's faith is to say, look, if that's the case, we'll find another way, right? You're absolved. That's pretty powerful, right? You could have heard Abraham say the other thing, would have said, no, you have to do this. If you don't do this, I'm going to, you're a goner, which is sometimes what happens in modern corporate America, right? Producer, like, you're out there, right? Like, that's the world that, that many of us live in, is perform or be gone, right? But Eliezer doesn't have that. He says, we're going to find a different way. What amazing faith that is, right? That's what faith is, at least according to this biblical accounting of Abraham's story, is that it is again, it's an affirmation that the potential is still possible with many conditions, even with many conditions, and also with many alternatives available to us. That's also a very important understanding of what faith is. It's not that there's only one answer and there's only one way. It's that there is a way. This is the way that I think we're supposed to go. All logic points in this direction. But if not, then I have faith that there'll be another way. Any responses, comments so far? Yes, Roberta P.
It seems like it's a very, like what Judy was saying, very hopeful and positive way of living your life. If you see a direction and it seems very difficult to get to, but you don't give up. You say, okay, well, then there must be another way. I like it. I think that's good.
Thank you, me too. I heard somebody, and I saw your hand, Suzanne. I heard somebody say, and I thought this was brilliant, right? So if you're trying something that you think is, is valuable to you, it's going to make your life better, or it's going to help you understand truth, or something like that. And it's not that if at first you don't succeed, try again. That's a very good proverb, maxim. But they said literally concretely, I will try something 100 times, and if after 100 times I still can't do it right, then I'm free to let go and not do it, right? Now that's an interesting concept, right? It's also very exhausting. But think about after 20 times of trying something, right? If you haven't figured out how to do a different way, you're insane, right? That's the definition of insanity. Doing the
Same thing over and over again, expecting a new outcome.
Yeah. Did you want to add, Suzanne, something else?
Well, I put it in the chat, but I often say, if you can't raise the bridge, lower the water.
Yeah, right. Look, we know how to do that. It's called the Panama Canal. Nice. Very nice. Lauren.
Well, I think when you say to somebody, I have faith in you, or I have faith in your decision, it's a great compliment, So, when you say it's, as opposed to telling them what to do, you say, I have faith in you. I have faith you'll make the right decision. And then I'll tell you what to do. It's, as a teacher, I used to, I would say, I have faith in you. I have faith you can do it.
Right. Trust, right? That their faith equals trust in that statement. And I think that's a really important component of this. And if we're going to be defining what faith is, trust is another value that is, it's in alignment with faith, but it has a different valence, a different quality to it, right? You hear this statement as well: trust but verify, right? Like, I trust you, right? And I'm going to verify that trust.
Well, I think when I was raising teenagers, I used to say, don't lose, don't lose my trust, because it'll take a long time to win it back.
Mm-hmm.
Not that,
Not that worked, but it was a really good idea.
That's a good idea. I tried.
I could totally relate. I have an 18-year-old who's learning the rules of like time and like time responsibility. It's just awesome. Yeah. Okay. So far so good. Can we keep on going? All right, good. Let's go into the next thing. Oh, this is fun. Okay, great. So now this is from the story of Joseph, when Pharaoh is like, he's got these dreams and he needs them interpreted, and there was this guy who said, once upon a time, I met this guy and he was an interpreter of dreams in jail. Okay. And so this is all the moment that establishes that Joseph is eventually going to become Pharaoh's right-hand man. Roberta P., you want to read?
Sure. Is there another one like this? A man who has the Spirit of God. Living in a world population surpassing 7.5 billion today, the concept of 1 in a million seems shallow. The notion that the world produces singular individuals capable of superhuman qualities is muted when we consider how improbable the uniqueness of one person can be. And yet our instinct is to constantly look for the outlier, the one whose actions defy the norms. Perhaps it is the satisfaction that we have the capacity to exceed our own limits. Perhaps it is the hope that there is something greater than ourselves. In the ancient Middle East, when the world population numbers were significantly smaller, The Pharaoh was considered a god, possessing superhuman qualities. The Pharaoh's administrative skills were only surpassed by his ability to divine truth better than anyone else. When the Pharaoh asked, "Is there another one like this, a man who has the Spirit of God?" our sensitive reading may first scrutinize the tone of his question. Pharaoh seems to be asking whether the kingdom can be managed by anyone else besides the Hebrew slave. When there is no direct response to his question, the Pharaoh continues by pronouncing, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is none so discerning and wise as you." This is quite a generous adulation considering Joseph is a foreigner who recently spent years in prison, who interpreted the dream of another describing that man's impending doom, and who conveniently suggested the Pharaoh should appoint someone discerning and wise.
Okay, great. All right. So just catching a little bit of the story, Joseph and Pharaoh, and the dynamic of Joseph and Pharaoh is, where's Pharaoh's self begin and end? Where does Joseph's self begin and end? And at that moment, we're going to reveal where our limitations have an opportunity for us to find qualities that others possess that are valuable to us. I think that's a part of that's another dimension of faith that is being revealed here in Pharaoh, who's supposed to be the most discerning and wise of all the land. He got to be a god, right? He's the most powerful one, and yet he's limited, and it takes a foreigner, a Hebrew slave, a prisoner, a former incarcerated prisoner, to come up and be more wise than him. Boy, that in and of itself is a tremendous act of faith, but that's not exactly where we're at. So let's keep on going.
And yet there is a sense that the Pharaoh does indeed believe no one could fulfill the role of chief economic advisor better than Joseph. Dream telling and executive leadership are synonymous in the mind of a Pharaoh. This is why the question here is more than an interrogative of clarification. This question is meant to reveal a core assumption we have in social organization. There are those who can fulfill roles and responsibilities better than others, even better than the Pharaoh. Empowering Joseph is an affirmation of the unique destiny of Abraham and his descendants. At the same time, the power is ephemeral, for we know that the story will take a fatal turn when there will be a new Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. In other words, there is no one more wise and discerning than another. Joseph's entire life story once again hinges on the fateful twist of events that play to his favor. Had the Pharaoh answered his own questions differently, Joseph's fate would have been sealed, and the family may have never considered traveling to Egypt during the years of famine, because there would not have been a qualified advisor to ration the bountiful yields. Perhaps the deeper message can be found in Pharaoh's prerequisite, a man who has the Spirit of God. Given this description, Joseph's unique status is most assuredly necessary. In fact, it is his faith and humility that sustain him for the remainder of his own life and sustain the family of Jacob in Egypt for another generation.
Thank you very much. Right? So there might be an indication here that's a little bit different. We've been hearing at this last moment, there's something that is also kind of new. Up until now, we've only heard about God in reference to the family of Abraham. So what does it mean for the Pharaoh to be in reference to the God of Jacob? And how is it that Joseph can then sort of take advantage or play to his favor the knowledge that there is a power greater than both he and Pharaoh that he has unique access to, that the Pharaoh wants unique access to. And it works very well for them in Egypt up until the time that there's a Pharaoh that says he doesn't know Joseph, and therefore he doesn't know the God of Joseph. And we know that story is the story that then prompts enslavement and ultimately the battle between the God of Israel and the Pharaoh and redemption to emerge after that. It's a great part of the story that becomes another subtext of what this book is all about. In the meantime, at this moment, the concept that Joseph is chosen as a person to interpret a power that the Pharaoh does not have is really like, it's uncanny, and it's a statement of faith. It is a faithful presentation that when we don't have all the things that we need to do to accomplish the goals that we have set before us, there are other people that can be a part of our lives. We need other people to be a part of our lives. Even a Pharaoh needs someone else to be a part of his life. Whew, right? What does it look like to know when you have people in this world who walk the world thinking that they are the center of the universe, and their charisma and their magnetism bring other people around them, and they only feel like they are the ones that could solve the problem. They might have other people who can do other things better than them, but they will not give it credit properly. So the last piece of this, which I think is an innovation of the Torah, is it says God. So the fact that there's a Pharaoh that can acknowledge that there's a God that's not part of his pantheon, and that there's a special spirit inside of this other person that the Pharaoh doesn't possess, that's also a very profound statement. As I wrote in that comment, this is the culmination of the Abraham's family being a part of the world. We have something to contribute. Okay, you might read it narrowly and say, look what happens to Joseph. He becomes the economic advisor. Jews are very good with money. You could read that. I hope you don't do that, right? But I hope what you see is that, like, there is a unique contribution that this family has to bring to the rest of the world that the rest of the world doesn't have. And it is in that unique contribution that Joseph is saved, that the family is saved, that ultimately the path to redemption will, and our own independence is firmly established. Any comments, responses? Judy, yes. Yes, and then Alice.
I just want to thank you for helping me write my wedding speech to my daughter, because this is so great as to marriage and how partners bring different things to the table and make the whole of two better than, anyway, you get what I'm saying.
That's very beautiful. First of all, Mazel Tov. That's awesome.
Thank you.
And now that you said it, we have to see the speech when it's done. That's great. Alice, what would you like to say?
I was going to say that I think our ancestors had such, I want to say, blind faith in God and God's hand in controlling everything that happened, that when Abraham sent his servant to find a woman, even when he said, I'll absolve you of the responsibility if you don't find one, he said that knowing full well that God was going to guide him and guide the woman that he found to bring him back and continue the family. So too in this story, where the faith of God is going to help me to interpret what's going on, God is going to let me tell the people when to gather all the food so that they don't starve during the lean years. All of those things, I think, were just a direct result of incredible belief that God's hand was really what was guiding them.
It's so interesting that, thank you for your comment, that you use the beginning of the comment and I think we use this as what you said was blind faith, as somehow that, like, the blindness is perhaps to the reasons why our faith should not take effect.
Right.
And yet, so in Abraham, he's like, yeah, well, it might not work, but God's going to provide. Or like, Joseph, and this is a wonderful sort of prelude to the next question. Joseph right? Look at Joseph's story. His brothers hate him. They throw him into a pit. They sell him into slavery. He gets thrown into jail in Egypt, and then he comes out of jail to like answer the Pharaoh's questions. Like, what's to stop him from getting his head chopped off right after that, right? It's nothing but his what you would call blind faith. But I think what I think I don't know how others were feeling. I think we don't want to say that blind faith is what the Torah is asking from us. On the contrary, the Torah is teaching us that even with the most complicated circumstances in which we might give up our faith, there is a way for us to develop a faith. And here are examples of where we've been able to succeed. I think that's what you were saying, and I really like it. Okay? Any Audrey and then Roberta P.
Two things. I'm going back a little bit, but one, I wanted to just comment on the wedding. You actually helped me write my wedding speech too for my son for September. When the quote from Herman Hesse, the quote from Herman Hesse about it is not our purpose to become each other; it is to recognize each other and to learn to see each other and honor them for what they are. I put that into. Like I wrote them whenever it was right after that class. I'm like, oh my God, this is perfect. So thank you. And then the other thing is with the God, I guess I thought that was like the Egyptian God thing. I didn't think of it as our God when I'd heard this, previously.
Right.
And
So,
maybe because I was young and never thought about it. So that's interesting.
Wonderful, right? So like another class at another point. And if you want to watch something fun right now, watch Moon Knight. Do you know about Moon Knight? Moon Knight is a Marvel show. It's on Disney Plus.
Oh, I think you told us about it and I put it in my list, but remind me, please.
Right. So basically what it is it's a modern rendering of the Egyptian pantheon of gods. You have an Egyptian pantheon of gods, you have a Greek pantheon of gods, you had a Babylonian pantheon of gods. And the thing that Judaism brings to the world is they say, there's not all these different godlike figures, right? There's only one. There's only one, right? It's called monotheism, right? And the Egyptians, they had a very developed concept of God, whatever that would be determined as, and the powers that would be identified with the Jewish God are powers that they also recognize, but they recognize that those powers are only part of one thing, right? It's like Zeus, right? Zeus is the head god, right? Well, Zeus is only the head god, but like, look at all they do. They fight, and there's struggles, and there's power dynamics, and all that other stuff. No, right?
I guess I thought it was like the Egyptian Zeus, who I'm not sure which of their gods that is.
It's not. I'm not an
whatever, but that's what I always thought. So
Ra.
It's an
Ra
interesting Ra.
Ra is the sun god, and I believe that I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the hierarchy per se, but I will say this: there is a little bit in the, if you want to read the Bible from an archaeological perspective, you will hear, just to give you one very blatant example of this contention of the one singular God concept. So in the beginning, the Torah reads, God separated light from darkness. Those are, even in the language themselves, concepts of deities that actually ruled over those sort of like states of being. And so the concept that there's a God that separated them out is a way that that God was the one to distinguish itself from those things. Okay, Shamayim, which means heavens, is taken from a Babylonian root of the heavenly God. But that's not our class today.
Yeah. I actually saw Hades Town over the weekend. So totally apropos to all this.
Were you there on Sunday?
Saturday.
My kids got to see it with my in-laws. They loved it.
Oh, okay.
Roberta,
I'll be curious what they thought of it. Yeah.
Oh, they loved it. And they got to meet the actors. Oh my God.
Oh, cool.
Roberta.
I was just going to say that although the Torah seems to obviously want us to have faith in God, I think this story or this portion is reminding us that we need to have faith in mankind.
Ah, that is so nice. So, do you want to elaborate a little further? Just
No,
to
you
clarify?
can.
Well, then let me see if I can rephrase it properly, right? Like,
Okay.
so here's the issue, right? And because this is it's a great segue to the next question, which Allison referred to before, and we're all kind of playing around with this. The concept of blind faith, the concept of like belief that things are going to happen beyond my control that I don't have to do anything about, right? But here is a story where Joseph takes his dreams, which ostensibly he doesn't have control over, and he interprets them, which he has total control over. And the concept of his ability to interpret the dreams is what makes him appealing to Pharaoh, because he's able to interpret the Pharaoh's dreams in a way that he likes. Same thing. So Joseph's power isn't in his like ability to sort of like walk the world with blind faith and say God will provide all the time. Actually, because look at him, he gets a heck of a lot of stuff taken away from him. So that's a great point. Any other comments so far? Are we good? Everybody's doing all right? Good. Yeah, we're okay. Candy, you okay over there? Good. Awesome. Barbara, you okay? Good. Audrey, you feel like reading? Okay, now this is from the final chapters of the
Sure.
book of Genesis. This is the last question in the book of Genesis. It is posed by Joseph after his brothers fling themselves on the ground after Jacob dies, and they say, "We're prepared to be your slaves." And Joseph responds with this. Go ahead.
It's bigger than you thought. Am I in the place of God? We are often too comfortable in our understanding of the world around us, depending upon reliability and certainty to provide a salve for our anxious thoughts. We encounter information and circumstances which challenge our comfort. We are pressed to make a choice. Do we embrace the new reality as it is presenting itself to us, or do we twist and bend the new understandings to fit neatly into our existing worlds? While both have their merits and values in the right place and the right time, the very acting of choosing in light of new information can be daunting, even stultifying. The last question in the book of Genesis brings this quest for a new certainty to light.
So the only thing, thank you. And then before you move on, just think about this one thing, right? Do we like conform to reality by like, okay, this is reality and we're going to change? Or do we say reality sucks and we're going to make it better? So Steve Jobs, if you ever read the biography, and this makes me think of it, right? He had this thing called a reality distortion field, right? It's sort of like the cone of secrecy in what was that? Mr. Smart, Dr. Smart, right? Agent Smart. The idea that
Maxwell.
Yeah, right. Maxwell Smart, right? That the idea was that Steve Jobs, in his like brilliance, his innovation, was that he saw the world as the way that it ought to be, and he looked around the way the world as it is. So these two are constantly in contention when we're talking about what it means to have reality or rational information before us. Okay, so keeping that in mind, now we read.
When Joseph's brothers fling themselves upon his mercy and prepare to be enslaved by him, Joseph asked, Am I in the place of God? Joseph's response to his brother's fear of reprisal extends beyond the momentary concern as an expression of confidence. Joseph is summarizing his life and theirs by expanding the narrow concern for fraternal revenge and framing their present and future in epic proportion.
Go ahead.
This question, am I in the place of God, pierces the realms of eternal seeking. Is God's absence, Joseph's question is liberating. Abraham walks with God. Joseph walks in God's shadow. God is eminently present in the first human beings in the garden, yet God profoundly removed in the stories of Joseph and his siblings in Egypt. If the beginning of the book is God seeking the human being, Ayika, where are you? The end of the book is the human being confidently locating himself in deference to the one. Human beings have now have their own distinct identity. And through Jacob and Joseph, we learn that our relationship with the divine is in partnership. Who asks a question like this? In it, the echoes of Jacob's literal question to Rachel amidst the struggles with her barrenness. The implications of Joseph's faith is empowering in response to his brother's submission that foreshadow their eventual enslavement. As the question of the book, we are invited to answer the question ourselves, formally recognizing our potential in relation to the divine source of life. I hadn't thought about the foreshadowing. That's really interesting.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. And I mean, there's a couple of things, right? We always think that like the enslavement is a surprise, but when the brothers come to Joseph and they're like, we're prepared to be your slaves, right? It's like, it's as if, and there are a couple of other indications in the book, they were primed for slavery by argument because there are very few references. I think there might only be one, maybe two references where the brothers use the language of God to talk about their behavior, their purpose. Remember, they get jealous, they throw their brother into a pit. They find they're in famine and they go down into Egypt, and they're really like grappling with the fact that this guy is making them do all this crazy stuff. And they don't understand that there might be something more divine than themselves. They're constantly looking at themselves. What do we do to deserve this? Right? So here it is, right? They said, look, brother, if we were you, we would throw you into slavery. Oh, by the way, didn't we do that? Yeah, we totally sold you into slavery a long time ago. Right? So they're like, hey, and Joseph, look at what Joseph does. He turns it around. Now, I suppose this is as appropriate as a time to say anything. When we talk about the Messiah, messianic figure in Judaism, there are two concepts. There's the Messiah that's born from the lineage of David, which we talk about. That's the one that that Christianity picks up on, and that's how they come to rationalize that Jesus was indeed a descendant of David and therefore was a Messiah. But there's also in Judaism a messianic figure who is the son of Joseph. They call him Joseph the righteous one. And this is an example of how does Joseph, who by the way, like we might be like scratching our head and like, this guy's a pretty boy flaunting his arrogance with his coat, and like, why would we want our messiahs to be humble figures, right? They look like Jesus, right? But like, what about this Joseph guy? Well, this Joseph guy becomes a righteous figure, not because he was kind to his brothers, but because he says, am I in the place of God? Right? The Messiah comes when you recognize that you're not going to be the person that puts on the coat and goes out into battle, right? And you're the one who is the champion and you knock down all of your foes and everybody swarms around you because you're the hero. That's not the Jewish vision of righteousness. The Jewish vision of righteousness is the person who understands that she or he or they stand in the presence or partnership with God. Am I in the place of God? Is the person that says there are things that are not in my control. That doesn't mean that I don't have a part in it, but it says that when it comes to these big things like, hey, should I put you brothers into slavery because of what you did to me? It ain't up to me. I think that would be the most grammatically correct English that I could possibly use. It ain't up to me. I don't think that that's how the Torah said it, because English translations are a little bit more formal than that, but like, you get it. What a wonderful model of righteous faith, right? To say that you can walk the world and say, you know what, there are certain things that are just not up to me. It doesn't mean that I'm not concerned. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to try to find an answer. But it says that, you know what, I don't have the answer. And I don't have to, Jeannie.
Is there some midrash that says that there's a Messiah in every generation? I'm just remembering something that I learned.
There's something similar. It's not really quite like that. What you have is you have an Elijah, right? We always have a little extra space for Elijah at our Passover table, at Havdalah at the end of every Shabbat, and when a child is brought into the world, right? And all of that is to say that in every generation, there's a potential for a Messiah in every generation, right? So I think that it's based on potential. There's also in rabbinic lore, there's this concept of the 36 righteous people that sustain the world. You've heard that, the Lamed Vavniks, right? So there are these like people who keep the world surviving. And because there are people who keep the world surviving, those might be the sort of like messianic figures. That's another possibility. Any other comments? It's great. All right, so we have a few more questions and some text to go through. This is now in the book of Exodus, and as we are reading this, this is sort of Moses in his awareness of the divinely given responsibility to go liberate the Israelites from Pharaoh's bondage in Egypt. And as he does it, he's uncertain. He's like, who am I? Who am I to go? Right? So we're going to read a little bit about that. Let's see. Jay, would you like to read?
Yes. Okay. Who makes man's mouth? Who makes a man dumb or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the God, Yahweh, whatever?
Yeah, I had to change it. It was a typo, but I fixed it.
Okay.
It's a long story short.
Okay. Defining the limits of faith can be contentious. As the ultimate expression of the inner life, measuring faith by word and action is virtually impossible to quantify. Religions are built upon and battled over limits of faith. Rarely is there peaceful acceptance when one side prevails in the argument. Coercion and crucible are tools used to shape the contours of a society. Even where the limits of faith are tested in the Bible, the divine voice, while declarative, is also inherently inadequate.
So Jeannie, did you get that? Because that's your comment as well about the sort of like contention of two faith propositions that are incomplete or that are in contention with each other, and how is it that they get resolved? And then we might even get to the proposition that God says, stuff in the Bible, and that still is somewhat inadequate because it takes human beings to interpret it. So having that as a foundation of what we're speaking about really does begin to outline where faith begins. Okay, so go ahead, Jay.
Okay. When Moshe shares his ambivalence in presenting himself as God's prophet to the Pharaoh, God asks him, who makes man's mouth? Who makes a man dumb or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Yahweh, God? The question is a direct response to Moshe's fear that he will be incapable of speaking effectively. That is, his capacity to articulate the awesome message of God will somehow be inadequate. It's not a proof text. It's not a proof text here either. If so, we would have expected Moshe's confirmation that God is indeed the maker of all senses. Moshe demurs instead, presumably out of a lack of faith. It's not that Moshe should respond with sophisticated understanding of biological evolution or the sophistry of the theologian. As witnesses to the moment, we are supposed to nod in affirmation that God is indeed the faithful creator of all human life and agency, while watching our prophetic hero wriggle in discomfort.
Right. So so basically the beginning of this is when Moses says, how can I go speak to Pharaoh? Because the words are, I have impeded speech, right? Like I'm a stutterer. I can't speak well. Why would you send me, God? Go find somebody else who can articulate much better than I can. So you could have said that God, this is a proof of God. God's gonna wipe away your inability to speak, and that basically Moshe has nothing to worry about. Even the things that he's worried about, God's going to fix. But that's, and so we're reading this because we're like, Moses, you should have been more faithful than that, right? Why would you even say that you can't do what God asks you to do, right? If God calls you to do something, you do it, right? So why is it that we have in our Torah that God asks the human being to do something and they don't do it? What kind of book of faith is that? If it's only a book of faith that says, let's watch our hero, move through his discomfort towards something greater, okay, but there might be something more. Go ahead, Jay.
Okay, perhaps God's question isn't a blatant expression of divine power or coercion at all. The questions are an invitation to faith, something that Moshe and Bnei Israel certainly have not been given permission to entertain with the Pharaoh in power. In this manner, the questions are prompts to reflect when the sense of freedom is indeed from God. While the biological origins of human life are well understood, God's questions to Moshe are the divine attempt to define the concept of freedom by basking in the glow of ultimate power and truth. Faith is never easily defined, and yet it forms the immutable source of religious doctrine. In one sense, faith is the deliberate and willful attempt to frame our uncertainty in the language of hope. If God's response to Moshe was in the form of statements and not as inquiries, we might overlook the description of faith the Bible seeks to define. To sense the world as one of God's divine creations refashions the human experience. This question evokes a transformation from a sense of self-purpose to a divine partnership. Meanwhile, Moshe's resistance to fulfill the mission framed by his inadequacies, he is slow of speech, ultimately becomes the primary subject of God's role in the palace of Pharaoh. Indeed, the entire book that follows. The one who doubts his capacity becomes the most significant voice of God's Torah and the one of the most significant leaders throughout human history.
Okay, thank you. Great. And so what I think we see here is that faith is not necessarily a declaration and an obedience to that declaration. And the reason why we can say that that's possible, what's being introduced here, is that God asks Moshe to basically answer the question, right? Instead of saying, I'm the one who gives everybody speech, and I'm the one who makes people deaf, so God is actually saying, wait a minute, who's the one that does that? And by doing that, God, it's almost as if, what if Moses said, Pharaoh, right? What if Moses said, I do? What if Moses said, that schnook out there in the desert, right? What if the answer was something else? But by asking it with a sense of possibility in there, that's the beginning of faith. That's where the question is an opportunity to establish faith. Because otherwise, God could just be declaring and people could just be obeying. But God is asking a question of invitation. And the invitation is something that this book is trying to teach us about faith. Faith is a partnership. Faith is the moment. Here, I'm going to go back to the words because as I wrote it. Pardon me for thinking that I wrote a sentence that I really liked. Right? Faith is the deliberate and willful attempt to frame our uncertainty in the language of hope. It is taking uncertainty and turning it into hope. You want to know what faith is? That's faith. And if that's what faith is, you can't teach it. You can't demand it. You can't make a proclamation about it and have it followed obediently. Not especially for us Jews, because we are skeptical and stubborn and we are willful and we are constantly testing the limits. So if you want to understand where the limits are in the place where we are limited and we have hope that we're going to get to the place where our limits are even bigger or more expansive than they were before. Any responses? Barbara.
I just want to say that I remember as a child, I don't know if I was 10 or 12, somewhere in there, we were sitting in the car, and I don't know how this came up. My dad was driving, and we were discussing God. And I said to him, why do you believe in God? And my father got very passionate. And this was not he was raised Orthodox, but he really pushed it aside. And he said, how can you not? He said, look at the sunsets, look at the trees. And he just went on and listing things. And he said, and look at you. You're a miracle. How can you not believe in God? And his voice was like so intense. And literally from that moment on, I was like a believer. I couldn't not believe. Now, my sister, who's 3 years younger, does not believe in God. Yet, she is an Orthodox Jew who religiously, I use the term, goes to services every week. And she actually said to me, if you believe, why don't you go every Shabbat? And I remember feeling like really conflicted with the answer, because I don't go to services every week. I go when I feel like going, but I totally believe in God, my wonderful God. And she can't.
Yeah.
And it's such a, is that
It's so
bizarre?
And Barbara,
amazing. Well,
that's the God I believe in too.
right. Wouldn't the question, hold on, Suzanne, wouldn't the question have gone back to your sister to say, if you don't believe, why are you going to shul every
I
week?
did ask her
Right?
that.
Because that's all.
She goes out of a sense of duty.
There you go. Flatten the playing field, right? And all of our preconceptions about what faith are, if they fit certain categories, right? So maybe you and your sister have a wonderful opportunity to have a conversation of defining your faith, your approaches to faith, and seeing if you can find something mutual. I don't know if you talked to your sister.
We do. We make it work. We do.
Yeah.
We get along very well. It's just funny that she goes every week and doesn't believe. And I have a very strong feeling about there is a wonderful, loving God, but I don't go every week. And so we play with this situation all the time and ask each other, like, how come? Like, how come you're doing that? And she's asking me, how come you're doing that? So
nice. Suzanne, please. I know you had to comment.
I'm sorry, Barbara, that's the only way I've stayed connected, is that I believe in that God. And when you live in Southern California, you can't not believe in that God. And now I'm back in New England, and it's a different kind of climate, but God is here. God did this and gave us, and look at you. You're all my present from God.
So basically, you're saying you have to go to California to like affirm your belief. Is that what you're saying?
No. It's just that when I started questioning and trying to find my faith, I just looked out the window and said, something greater than me made this happen.
That's nice. That's nice. Sherry, welcome back. Did you have a hand up?
I was wondering, because I won't commit either way. I love going to services. I too don't go every week. Is there like a one-word kind of sentence like we used in the beginning, a Voltaire quote? Like, there's many rabbis that will say they don't believe in God, but I'm just wondering, or maybe just
You want a one-line definition for faith?
no, I love that, but for people who say they don't believe in God, and there's plenty of rabbis around, local.
Yeah, but I think the question back, right, because it's very Jewish, is what do you believe in, right? And you will hear people talk about, right? I think that's the issue is what's loaded there is belief, and I think what we're trying to get at is like what Voltaire said is, Faith is believing that when there isn't a reason for the belief, right?
Okay,
Right?
that
Like
works for me.
yeah. So to adapt that in a Jewish way, right? So the Jewish thing is, so what do you believe in? It's the same thing. It's just in Jewish language.
I like Suzanne's definition.
Good.
And
Oh,
Barbara's.
that was nice too. Candy.
To find my unmute. I don't know why we have to feel that there's such certainty, that everybody's belief can be a little bit different. And I think about throughout the millennia, these stories of the many people whose stories were never written or never put down, believed as many, all the varieties of what we all believe in. They still did stuff. They still had the belief, and it still continued on. So just because my belief and your belief is different, I just think it's a question of what belief, but it continues on. There is a belief.
That there's something so profound in what you're saying, right? Like who's writing the story? So all we have is records of the things that help us understand what faith and belief are based on previous recollections. Just by way, my colleague, Arlene Chernow, maybe some of you know who she is. She wrote this beautiful poem about Asenath. Asenath is Joseph's wife, right? She's just mentioned once in the entire Bible as being the parent of Joseph's children. But like, tell me, like, so she wants the wonderful poem about like her story, right? And like her story is as hopeful and faithful as anything. And it's beautiful, right? So we have not the privilege of hearing from the stories of those who came before us, and we also have the responsibility of reclaiming the stories that were silenced, which is why we have to hear women's stories, which is why we have to reclaim stories of the varieties of identity and know that they've been in existence throughout all of human history, right? Like for us to think that like, people who are of a variety of gender identification only existed now is absurd, right? Let alone the nature of it. But we need the stories to reclaim it because that's what we believe in. Great. Any other comments for the moment? Wonderful. Let's go through. We're going to do one more question. I don't think we'll get through two more with our time. But thank you. Did we finish this one, Jay? Yes, we did. All right, great. Thank you, Jay. And let's see. Lori, would you like to read? Good.
When doubt becomes humility, how will Pharaoh listen to me since I have uncircumcised lips? How will Pharaoh listen to me? One of the great ironies of the Torah is the transformation of Moshe from the man of impeded speech to the great orator of the final words given to the people on the banks of Jordan River before entering the land of Israel. How can someone so convinced of his inability to communicate effectively move to the bold and courageous proclamations of God's power in Egypt, to the wise and discerning voice of the lawgiver, to the sagacious teacher of a new generation of free people? Either there is a misperception of one's ability, or this becomes the expression of a person who possesses great humility. When Moshe asks, how will Pharaoh listen to me since I have uncircumcised lips? And later, how will Pharaoh listen to me? We note first the self-doubt of the Redeemer and the challenge he faces in bringing justice to a world deaf of suffering of his people. But we are also here, this profound humility, Moshe, self-awareness, is juxtaposed to his self-doubt. As much as we celebrate or ponder the transformation of the silent one, the man of impeded speech, we also hear the expression of growth that the Torah preserves in the most important character. Moshe is the one who becomes a model of transformation for the slave to become the free person, from the uninitiated to the covenanted, from the bystander to the actor. One lesson to glean from Moshe's humility is precisely the power to overcome doubt. One who is haughty or arrogant may have doubts, but the protective sleeve over the emotions inhibits their humility. Humility is the act that transforms the slave to the free person. Humility is the act that transforms doubt into faith, from insecurity into genuine confidence.
Thank you very much. Right. So here's an example of how faith is an expression of humility, and the concept that not only is there uncertainty and things that are unknown in the world, and you are placing a confidence in the fact that the answers will be revealed to you, or that you will somehow acquire the necessary knowledge to confront the uncertain future with confidence. That you are also understanding this kind of juxtaposition that you are limited, that you don't have everything that you need. There would be one thing that after God says to Moses, remember the last question that we read, right? Like, who makes man's mouth and who makes people, right, by question. Part of it is for Moses to say, oh, well, you know what? If I have these limitations, God, you're going to help me answer them, right? That's Joseph, right? I'm not in the place of God, but God's going to help me get there. But now this moment, it's that at where Moses, he says it again, right? It's not just a simple repetition of like, I have impeded speech. It's to say that his has self-doubt. I may not have all of the things that I have, and I am going to humbly accept that what is incomplete within me is going to be found in somewhere else, and in particular here, God. And the concept that humility is a profound act of faith, I think is a kind of nice concept for Moshe. Any comments about that? Judy.
My comment is about uncircumcised lips. I've never heard that before, and I assume it refers to a speech impediment.
Yes.
But yeah, that's an interesting.
There are a lot of dimensions of what does, it's called arel sfatayim. So arel, it means uncircumcised, right? The thing that the foreskin that is removed from the male penis is called the orla, right? It's the same word in Hebrew. Also, by the way, when you have a new tree, the fruit that is first blossomed is considered untithed fruit, and that is also supposed to be used in a certain kind of offering. It's called the orla. It's the same thing. So here it's a metaphor, right? It's a concept that you have uncircumcised lips. Like, what does that mean? How do you make your lips circumcised? Right? So it's the concept that they are like unconsecrated or whatever. And by the way, that's, it is a motif in the book that is going to be used even in the book of Deuteronomy, not by Moses, but by like, what does God ask of all of humanity to also, walk with these lips that are covenanted. Right? So that's what do we do circumcision for? We covenant people, right? It's so that they're in relationship with God, so that they understand that when they act, they're not acting by themselves. So maybe this thing of Moses saying, how can I do it if I have uncircumcised lips? Is if he's saying, maybe it's like, this is a maybe. If I walk into Pharaoh and say, God told me to do this, right? There's a little bit of ego in there, isn't it? Right? I'm the guy that God told me to go and do. But if you walk in, not with uncircumcised lips, but with covenanted lips, then you say, God, this is the God of the Hebrews that says, let my people go. Moses doesn't say, let my people go. Moses says, let my people go. That is God's people. Right? Let all of humanity be free, if you will. It's a nice comment. Anything else? Great. So I'll tell you what, we are like near the end, and enjoy reading the last question. By the way, there are so many questions, as I said at the beginning, that are related to faith. But I hope you're beginning to see kind of in concept where faith actually does rest in Jewish tradition. And I believe that the questions are a fantastic vehicle for establishing that faith for us. The very concept of a question invites us into faith in a way that proclamations and statements can't. Sometimes it's easy for us, right? Give us a Torah on Mount Sinai and we follow it. But for the most part, look at the world, right? People who are completely and absolutely adherent, which by the way is impossible, but like completely and absolutely adherent to all the mitzvot that are available to us, right? Like, are those the people that we should all strive to be? In a way, yes. But what we should really be striving towards is being in relationship, right? Being able to ask those questions and knowing that through those questions, we can develop a faith. Barbara, this is why you don't go to shul every week. You're not a bad Jew because you do that. You find your faith in many ways, right? That's the answer to your sister. It's very hard for us Jews to think that we've created this system that says a good Jew does this, but that's not what the Torah is teaching us. You all know that. I could say that in this group. I'm telling you, if I went to my Orthodox brothers and sisters and said, that's not what God is asking of you, I would be shown the door very quickly. I don't know. Actually, I'd like to try it and see what happens. There are far more radical things and ideas out here, right? So, but if I was actually like, I think it's a great compliment. Throughout Jewish history, there's a couple people that have been accused of heresy, and I would be like proud. Moses Maimonides, right, was accused of heresy. Baruch Spinoza was accused of heresy. I love that, right? I think it's like the greatest compliment ever. So anyways, I hope you guys all saw my email. It was a little bit detailed. Start taking looks at dates, making sure that it goes